Good evening. One of the cool things about coming back to this event for me personally is the growing network of Villanova alums that are in the real estate industry. And you guys, you'll have this network and you'll be tapping this network for years. And that's just a beautiful thing, and you should all take advantage of it and get to know your fellow alums. I'm going to take a little side trip and give you some background before I talk about our keynote speaker. And for those of you that have had me in class, you've heard this speech before. When I go and talk about REITs, I normally go off topic and I talk a lot about Bill Rouse. And to know our keynote, I think, is to know about Bill Rouse story. So if you just bear with me, I want to tell the Bill Rouse story. And when I start this in class, I usually say, when I think about the greatest Philadelphians of all time, the folks that have had the largest impact on this city, who is that? Ben Franklin, which should be part of that conversation. The only other person I can think of is Bill Rouse. And why Bill Rouse? What was his impact on this region and city? Well, first of all, when he started Rouse & Associates, he took Western development to Great Valley. At the time, Great Valley wasn't on anybody's radar. At the time, people were like, you're building something where? Today there's probably 5 million square feet at the Great Valley interchange of 202, and it really led to the development of Westchester, Exton, Downingtown, Chester County. Again, that was the forerunner of Western development. He then looked downtown, and we used to have a rule in Philadelphia that you couldn't build a building higher than William Penn's hat, the guy on the top of City Hall. So we had a lot of low-rise and a very mediocre center city. And Bill Rouse bought a site and fought that successfully and was able to build One Liberty Place, which in my view, and again, former students know this, I think is the greatest building in our city. But it redefined the entire skyline, because then Market Street West now had skyscrapers. So when you see the Eagles game on TV and they pan Center City, all those towers were because Bill Rouse had the guts to build the first building and lead that Western development. But it wasn't just what he did on a business side that I admire. It's what he did on a civic-minded basis. He, years ago, the convention center was being built in the city, and it was floundering. There was union issues, there was cost overruns, there was delays. It was a nightmare. And Bill Rouse came in and took on the position of leading the construction of the convention center. He did this gratis. He didn't get paid a nickel, but he did it because he always cared about making the city a better place to be. The convention center got built. It was just recently expanded, and that led to the hotel renaissance in Philadelphia. And again, never would have happened without the convention center. The convention center never would have happened without Bill Rouse. He did the same thing for the Kimmel Center. The Kimmel Center needed money. They all had this great idea to build this great music venue on Broad Street, the Avenue of the Arts. Bill Rouse led the funding and the development and the ultimate, and again, now our Avenue of the Arts is a phenomenal place. So all these little pieces, I think, have led to what I think we have a phenomenal city in Philadelphia. We're a first-class city. And I could go on and on. There's one of my other just quick sidebars was he was one of the first people to put statues in front of his buildings. And someone said, "Why do you do that? It's a warehouse. Why are you putting a statue in front of the warehouse?" And his response was, "Well, when the guy that works in that warehouse comes out to see the site on a weekend, and he brings his family and his kids, he wants that guy to be proud to show his kids where he works." And he always did something that was simple. It's a swan, it's a fox, it's an eagle. It's something that everyone can see and understand. And when asked why was that, he said, "I didn't want the little kid to say, 'Daddy, what is that?'" So he really thought about the people that were going to be in his buildings and just his. So again, I could go on and on. There's many stories. And so why am I doing this? Well, Bill Rouse also smoked cigarettes, and he developed cancer. And this was an icon. This was just a legendary guy in our city. And Bill Rouse, who could possibly fill this void? Well, Bill Rouse handpicked his successor. And he met Bill Hankowski. Bill Hankowski was the president of the Philadelphia Industrial Development Authority. He was there for 11 years. They probably worked together on the convention center. They probably worked on the Kimmel Center, among some other things. But again, so Bill Bill, and nobody wanted to even talk about it. This was such a, a terrible topic at the time. So Bill Hankowski came on board initially as the Chief Information Officer, and in 2003 he became CEO and Chairman of the Board. So again, I think in order to understand Bill Hankowski, I needed to tell this Bill Rouse story. But Bill didn't just sit on his hands. Liberty Property Trust owned 50 million square feet of real estate in 2003. Today they're close to 80 million. And you think about that growth, and you think about the period we just went through, and the recession we just went through, it's an incredible growth story. But I think Bill Rouse also probably knew that Bill Hankowski is also a civic-minded guy. He sits on a dozen boards. He's a guy that cares about the people that work in his buildings. He's a guy that cares about his company. So we were really honored tonight, and again, I'm a big fan, obviously, of Bill Rouse, but of Liberty Property Trust. And so please welcome Bill Hankowski, the CEO of Liberty Property Trust. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. That was very kind, and it was kind of you to bring up Bill. I really got to, I have some things to talk about, but just picking up on that. So how did I actually really get to know Bill Rouse? It was actually the Convention Center project. I had met Bill earlier in Philadelphia on a couple projects he had worked in town. But on the Convention Center, I was the public city guy on the negotiations. He was representing the authority, and we needed to get it approved by City Council. And at the time, Wilson Goode was mayor. For those who remember Philadelphia history, there was a tragic bombing in West Philadelphia, the Move tragedy, so Wilson Goode's political power was fundamentally non-existent. So the only way this was going to work, and Bill came to see me, I'll never forget, he said, well, how are we going to do this? And I said, well, there's only one guy, and it's the guy who runs the finance committee on City Council. He's the only guy that can get this done. He said, who's that, John Street? I said, all right, I'll go see him. So what happened was Bill, Street, and myself met every Monday morning at 6 o'clock at John Street's house at 15th and Master for 6 months and negotiated the entire transaction. Now, to your story, unfortunately, part of that was John Street doesn't smoke. He's actually a Jehovah's Witness, so nor does he have coffee. So Bill, we would get there, and then Bill would send his driver out, Ralph. Ralph would come back. We'd have 2 cups of coffee. We would take we had the caucus. We'd run out. We'd street in his house, sit out there so Bill could have a smoke. That experience is how I really got to know Bill. It's also a good message about career, which is you're going to make the best friend you're ever going to make in your career working on a deal, working on a transaction, getting something done, being in a foxhole. Those are life experiences. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. So anyhow, so I have 4 things I thought I'd talk about briefly here, and then open it up for questions. Happy to talk about anything. Phillies just went ahead, by the way, when I pulled in late in the parking lot, which has me really excited. Thought I'd just talk a little bit about my career, not because it's important how I got where I'm at, but just maybe it might be helpful, illustrative things to think about. I want to talk a little bit about Liberty, not as a commercial, but more so you understand kind of what does a big REIT look like and how does it kind of operate. I'll give you a couple thoughts about career, and then I'll give you about 4 or 5 what I think are significant trends in the real estate space that's happening that you might just want to think about. So those are the 4 things I thought I'd mention. So myself, I grew up in Pittsburgh, so I'm a transplanted Western Pennsylvania guy. Did go up to New England for college. Came in college, so it's my senior year. I fundamentally have no idea what I'm doing. So to the degree you have anxiety right now about what's going on, it's not that unusual place to be. So I applied. I didn't want to do the Peace Corps because I didn't really want to go overseas, but I applied to Vista. I thought maybe I'd go teach in Mississippi. I applied for jobs with companies. I also applied to graduate school. And I was actually going to take a job with Prudential. It would have changed my entire life. And one of those management things in 5 years, and you go to night school at NYU, and I figured, okay, that'll kind of work. And then I was lucky enough to get a fellowship and was able to go to Wharton. So I went to graduate school. Now, you don't usually see on my resume that I graduated because I didn't. So what happened was I went to Wharton, and there was a series of internships, so I needed beer money. So I figured I'd sign up for one of these internships, right? Room and board and tuition was covered, but I didn't have any money for beer. So I looked on a map, and it was to get graduate students to work in small cities because you couldn't, you know, you wouldn't get attracted there, right? You weren't going to work in Camden or Chester or Trenton or Wilmington, which were the 4 cities you could pick. Didn't have a car, looked on a map, saw something called the Patco High-Speed Line, so I picked Camden. And I went over there, and it was true. The theory of the internship was true, which was those little cities do not attract a whole lot of talent. So if you go there and have some amount of talent, and there's somebody who catches your eye, or you catch somebody's eye, suddenly you have a lot of responsibility. So I worked there as an intern that turned to a full-time job. My second year, I never ended up graduating because the mayor at the time offered me a full-time job, which was be the director of development for Camden, New Jersey, a position that had never existed before. It was my internship project was to sort of design what it would look like. So at 24, I was running a department with 75 people, a $5.5 million budget, and I had no idea what I was doing. Other than, you know, work hard, read a lot, try to be smart, and make some good judgments. It was a terrific life experience in the sense of responsibility early. It wasn't glamorous. Camden, New Jersey is not glamorous. But it's an opportunity to learn fast. So I did that for 2 mayors. Unfortunately, the first one went to jail, but that's a whole other story. And then I decided I did want to get back over on the Philadelphia side. So I actually worked for a year for a subsidiary of Amtrak that was responsible for transferring commuter rail lines from Conrail at the time to like SEPTA, New Jersey Transit. Whole interesting story again that I won't bore you with. But then I decided I want to get back into kind of development, real estate, economic development. And the city was thinking about trying to build a convention center. And they thought they'd have a private developer do it. And so I kind of looked and said, there's this company called the Reading Company, which was the residual of the Reading Railroad. Their fundamental asset was they owned real estate. They owned the Reading Terminal Market, the train shed. They were thinking about this site. I went there and I said, look, I think this is the best site. I'd love to join your team, and I'd love to work on trying to make this the site that gets picked. We couldn't agree on salary. So I said, okay, here's the deal. This site gets picked. You're going to pay me what I wanted. We don't get picked. You were right. So that was the deal. So I created my first bonus. And we went off and we got picked. Long, arduous process, and that ended up being the project that Bill Rouse worked on. But what happened was it ended up becoming a public project. So I decided to follow the project, and that's how I got to the Philadelphia Industrial Development Corporation, where I worked under 3 different mayors, Wilson Good, all of Ed Rendell, and a piece of John Street, and had a just tremendous life experience. Worked with Eagles and Phillies and stadiums and hotels and convention centers and lots of fun stuff. But Bill was always on my back and kept saying, yeah, you got to come on to the other side. Why don't you make some money for a change? And so ultimately I joined the company, and as Jim said, tragically Bill, I joined and tragically Bill passed away, and I got where I am. So it's kind of an unusual path. It was mainly in the public service. It wasn't kind of going through the real estate industry traditionally. But I think it's good because I think it's illustrative of you can get in this business lots of ways. You can, go get a degree, be in real estate, join a company, and do it kind of traditionally. But there's lots of other ways to get into the business. I'll come back when I talk about career. Let me talk about Liberty for a minute. So Liberty Property Trust is a real estate investment trust. We're a REIT, publicly traded on the New York Stock Exchange. So Bill started the company privately in 1972. We went public in 94. We are in the office and industrial space. That's where we play. We're about $7 billion today, a little north of $7 billion at 4 o'clock when the market closed. So it's a fairly large REIT. It's one of the top 30 in the country in terms of size, market cap, enterprise value, however you want to look at it. There's a publication that annually talks about who's the 25 largest owners of office space, industrial space, builders of office buildings, builders of industrial buildings. We are on all 4 of those lists. So we're very we own a lot of it, and we're very active in it. There's only 2 other companies that are on all 4 of those lists. So we've got 77 million square feet, 3.5 million that's under development, so 80, net of 80 total. We're in 12 states. We're in the United Kingdom. We're in 20 U.S. markets. So it's a relatively large enterprise geographically. And what do we do? Like, what do you do if you work at Liberty? Well, you might do a variety of things. So we are what's called a fully self-administered REIT, meaning we do most of the traditional real estate functions in-house. So Tom was up here earlier. Mike Hagan, our Chief Investment Officer, Karen Hozansky, our Head of HR, Senior VP, is with us this evening. So we've got people that lease space. We did 5.5 million square feet last quarter. We'll do 15, 16 million square feet this year, 800 to 1,000 transactions a year. So it is a lot of activity. When you lease space, you have a responsibility for a portfolio. You've got spaces. You have to know the space. You have to know the competition. You meet with brokers. You meet with customers. You sell. You make proposals. You think about math and finance and deal structure. You then hopefully get it, and you have to negotiate the lease, deliver it. So if you're a pharmaceutical marketing rep, you're a marketing rep. You're not a salesperson. If you're a leasing person at Liberty, you're a salesperson. You figure out the deal, you make the deal, you close the deal. That's what real estate people do. Real estate's an interesting business. It's intermediated. Not all businesses are, i.e. there's real estate brokers. So you've got, in a sense, two audiences when you're in the business. So we do that. We also run these properties. That's a lot of real estate to run. It's 650 separate assets. So we have a team of property management folks who work for Liberty and think about Liberty's buildings. We're big believers that this matters, that proactive landlords can be a competitive advantage. We are big believers in sustainability and high-performance buildings. So we have 78 Energy Star buildings. That's more than any other REIT, second largest of any company. The only one larger is Hines. We also have a lot of LEED buildings. I'll talk about development in a moment. We've built more LEED buildings than anyone also. So we think about these buildings, and we think about how to operate them. So 130 of our assets are on a building-wide area network, where we can actually monitor real-time energy utilization on all those buildings. Think about, how did it turn on this morning? Are we using more or less electricity? So we do that. We build these buildings, so we have a long history of development. As was mentioned, Liberty Place is sort of one piece of the Philadelphia skyline. I often thinking about Bill. Bill also is the guy that bought the site, which ultimately became the Comcast Center. So I cannot think of a skyline in America that one individual in their life defined so dramatically. And so I'm very proud that that's part of our heritage. But we also build 1 million square foot warehouses and 100,000 square foot warehouses. Currently we have 14 buildings under construction, $350 million. Not totally consistent with what you hear in terms of where the economy is. So we're fairly active. Then you have to keep track of all this money. So you have to have financing people and accounting people. You have to buy and sell real estate, so we have an investment team. So it's a very active company kind of doing all pieces of the business. We're a little interesting in how we finance. The traditional real estate model, go get a construction loan, go get it leased, go get a permanent loan. That's kind of a model, right? Try to put some equity in, historically as little as you could, get as much from the bank. We actually don't do any construction loans, so we have a corporate line. Part of what is effective with the REIT model is you're able to act much more like a classic public company. So we have a $500 million line that's expandable to $750. So we basically draw on the line to build the buildings. We never get a construction loan. So when our people sit with a customer, there's never a financing contingency. You want a building? We'll build it. You need tenant improvements? They're done. Secondly, we don't mortgage our assets. So we borrow as a company. We borrow off our balance sheet, unsecured corporate notes, just like IBM or GE or somebody like that. And as a result, our properties are not encumbered. Now, you might say, well, why would you do that? I mean, you can do it, so I guess you can do it just because you can. But it's part of our business model. So the other piece of how we operate is we have teams in every market we're in. So we're big believers. This is about real estate, right? It's location, location, location. You need local market knowledge. So we want people in the field to be empowered in the field. And other than asking us permission to do something, we don't want them to have to ask anybody else. So you're a customer, you're in one of our buildings, you're out of space, you look around and say, well, this floor's all filled, where can I go? We'll rip up the lease, put you in another building down the street. So we have total flexibility with the portfolio, with our customers, with the assets. We don't have to go ask a lender permission to do anything. And we think that's a competitive advantage. So there's a theory of how the company operates. We may be right, we may be wrong, but it's our theory. It's how we operate and how it works. and it's been, relatively effective. As I said, on the development side, we've built 51 LEED buildings, 8 million square feet, so we're very active in that space, and are happy to be active doing it right now. So that's Liberty. Career. When a lot of people do ask me about real estate and how do I get in, what should I do, all that. It's a very interesting industry. It's a very diverse industry, right? There's lots of pieces to it. There's people that have to raise the money, the capital. Obviously it's a capital-intensive business. There are people that have to lease this space, as I said, whether it's with companies or with brokerage firms. We have to run all this real estate in America, so property management's a huge issue. There are people that supply the industry, so contractors and architects. So there's a diverse group of skills necessary for the real estate sector to succeed. And you can be in lots of different places. And I think it's helpful as you think about, if you're interested in the business, to think about the complexity of the business and all the places you might be able to sort of plug in, do something, get involved. I think sometimes the sex appeal is, I want to be a developer. I've met many a young person who says, what do you want to do? I want to be a developer. A developer is where you get at the end. You don't start out being a developer. You have to start out being something. You could be a finance person or a leasing person or a construction person, a property management person, and then you're going to learn about the business and the intricacies, and then over time you'll get a skill set that will help you think about all the pieces, because development is all the pieces. Where is it? What's it look like? How am I going to finance it? How am I going to lease it? How am I going to operate it? And all of that should be happening dynamically at one time as you think about development. So you get to development, you don't start in development. But you should think about, as I said, you could be on the leasing side of this business, you can be in the development side, but again, by disciplines. You might want to have an engineering background, which would be interesting. I mean, Tom mentioned having a CPA. I do think having a skill, and it doesn't have to be, it could be sales. I want to start out in brokerage. But sort of pick a piece of the business to say, I'm going to go do that. Kind of get that under my belt as a way to get in. There's the whole financial piece, and there's lots of places to plug in the financial sector. So you could work for a bank and be a lending officer. A great way to learn about real estate is go on the other side and critique people trying to get money. Work for a fund, work for asset managers. Lots of institutional capital owns real estate. They need people to keep track of it. How's it all go? You might start out in front of a screen and doing Argus runs and think to yourself, well, it's a little bit boring. But if you can get into the nitty-gritty of how it all works piece by piece and build it up, that's the discipline and experience you need. So you can be on Wall Street, you can be banking. I would encourage people to think about property management, generally viewed as the least sexy part of the business. There's techs and people and they worry and the lights go bad or something's wrong in the men's room. Property management has become an extraordinarily important part of the business. These assets, to the degree you can run them more efficiently and effectively, so that property managers are much more having to be asset managers, to the degree that much more capital has come into the space. It used to be, go get a construction loan, build it, lease it, mortgage it, mortgage will amortize, I own it for nothing. Move on to the next deal. And you kind of didn't pay a whole lot of attention to the portfolio. That is no longer the case. People really care about these portfolios. And property management is a much more sophisticated business. So technology, energy efficiency, green LEED buildings, and it's a place where candidly there's a dearth of competent talent. So if you're thinking about opportunity, supply and demand, this is a place where the supply and the demand is in favor of competent people in property management. We can't find enough of them. And then you can always think about sort of the support industries. You could sort of get into real estate with an architectural firm, a contracting firm, a vendor that supports the industry. That's sort of it from a technical side. From a kind of theme side of career, first, I echo what Tom said. I would try to be good at something, a discipline, a skill set that you could bring to the table. Two, I would be very active in the industry and outside the industry. So there's lots of, there's there's Crew, Cornet, NAOP, lots of organizations to join and be members of. It is a relationship business. You're going to see, if you're on the leasing side, whether you're a landlord or working for a brokerage firm, you're going to see the same people over and over, and you're going to build relationships. If you're on the property management side, you're going to work in a world of vendors and operators, and you're going to build relationships. So being active in the industry is a very good thing. But it's also a very good thing to be active in the community. Because no matter what product type you're in, the community is your customer. Businesses for office space or industrial space, people in your community for apartments, people in your community who are the customers at retail space, people who use hotels. So understanding your community, being plugged in, giving back, which I believe very fundamentally is a core value, but also is actually a very good thing from a career perspective, to do it early, not later in your career. Do it at the beginning, and it'll serve you well. As I said, I think making friends and relationships is a huge piece of this business. It happens over and over again. And so my last piece of, two last pieces of career advice, and then I'll talk about trends. One is I would place a very high value on personal integrity in this business. This is a business where your handshake is your bond. It moves quick. It's big transactions or little transactions. There's leases. Yep, the deal's done. I agree, whatever. You need to do what you say you're going to do. You need to be honest and forthright. You need to be honest if there's a mistake, if there's a problem. Don't try to hide it early in your career. It'll only muck you up. And what happens is people early in their career get reputations. And it is very hard to earn a reputation. It's easy to lose a reputation. I tell our folks once a year at some meeting, they've all heard this, I'd rather you lose a deal than we lose our reputation in a transaction. Because it's so valuable and hard to get. And when you have a reputation, it may not feel that way the day you give up a deal and you lose it to someone else, but over time, you will be much more effective in the business. It's not only the right thing to do, it's the most effective thing to do. Because people will go back to people they can trust, who are honest, who deliver, good or bad. So that's very important. My final sort of career thought is culture. When I was actually at PIDC and thinking about trying to join the private sector, I talked to a lot of people, the classic networking, people you knew, and there was a conversation I had with a woman banker that just to me was very impactful, and I sat down with her and I started asking about banking and what did that make sense? And she said, Bill, you have this all wrong. You're asking all the wrong questions. I said, what are you talking about? She said, you should totally worry about culture wherever you go. Every company has a culture, whether they consciously decide to have one or don't. So even if they don't decide to have one, it'll happen implicitly. There are places you love to go to every day where people are working as teams, where the doors are open, where you can ask a question, where people are trying to support you, and there are cultures that are rough. Now you can decide, but you should be conscious of it. It matters, and it will matter how you advance. It'll matter how much fun you're going to have. So I would advise to think about culture as much as compensation when you're thinking about what to do career-wise. All right, a couple trends in the business that you might want to think about. All right, so what's happening in real estate right now? And I'm not going to talk about, where are rental rates or where are cap rates. That's not what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to give you sort of big, in my mind, sort of big themes. One big theme, the emergence of real estate as a accepted asset class for capital to invest in. Over the last 25 or 30 years, there's been a stunning movement here. So 25 or 30 years ago, there weren't really REITs. The entire REIT equity market cap was $8 billion in like 1994, and today it's $400 billion. So REITs weren't really a space. Big institutions were nervous because there was no transparency. You had the S&L crisis. Today, the industry has tremendous transparency. You have You have almost 150 REITs who every quarter have to put out public information that everybody can look at and sort of see where are rents, what's happening with pricing, what are TIs in the market, what's happening with RevPAR if you're a hotel REIT. There's all this information out there, and as a result, all this capital has decided that's an interesting place to be. Foreign capital, pension fund capital, endowment capital, public market capital, and in a world where I think we will have low interest rates for a while, and returns will be hard to find, real estate has become even more attractive. So here's a thought. The REIT stocks have done fairly well over the last 12 months, comparatively. A huge contributing factor, Japanese mutual funds, who can find no return anywhere else and have decided we're going to own the stock, dividend-paying stocks of American real estate investment trusts. Huge inflows. I mean, I'm talking like hundreds of millions of dollars a quarter that are flowing into the space, billions over that time frame. So the capital moves quickly in the world. It's one thing I've learned on the private side. It's relatively agnostic. It goes to where it can make money. But real estate, which was a place it was nervous about, it is no longer nervous about. So there, by the way, this is also all kinds of opportunities. So there are funds and advisors and people that handle money, huge in the space, didn't exist 25, 30 years ago. And I think it will continue to be a huge piece of the real estate space. Second big trend, consolidation. So it's an industry that historically was stunningly diverse, segmented. So every town had their local office guy, the local retail guy. There were brokerage houses in every town. It was a very decentralized business. There's been tremendous consolidation. Today, the 5 large mall REITs own 75% of all investment-grade shopping centers in America. Now, they're at the extreme. You go to Australia, and almost all investment-grade real estate are owned by Australian REITs. This isn't just a REIT plug, by the way. There's also tremendous now amount of assets. You look at industrial space, it's almost all owned, either by public companies, big funds, the Invescos, the REITs, who have gone into that space and own that space. So tremendous consolidation of assets in less hands. Every town still has terrific local sharpshooters who will always keep you honest. But I think it's going to be much harder to become a local sharpshooter. So I think that the cost of entering this business has gone up. The brokerage firms, huge consolidation, CBRE, JLL, but you even see now Cassidy Turley rolling up a number of firms. And it's logical, right? It's efficiency, it's scale, and it's serving the customer. Because now the customer, particularly if you think in office industrial, these are large multinationals. And they want to deal with one landlord, they want to deal with one brokerage firm. The business has gotten more sophisticated than it used to be. Sometimes, the real estate business used to be breakfast with a broker, lunch with a broker, drink with a broker, and then at night you had to figure which half was BS and which half was true. That was market knowledge, right? Today, you have unbelievable access to market knowledge of all kinds on a real-time basis. So this is a business that's very fast in a way that it didn't used to be. Very, goes across markets, across countries. Big trends, big, massive, long-term trends. I think there's one other big trend kind of on the negative side. This is a theory I have. I don't know if we'll see if it's right or wrong. I think there will be tremendous functional obsolescence in tremendous amounts of real estate over the next decade to 20 years. What's happened, if you look, and Philadelphia is a great example, if you know Philadelphia, right? So downtown Philadelphia, Manhattan did this first, and then we sort of copied them. So you had 1930s, 1940s office buildings. They were narrow because we're trying to get natural daylight. If you think about some of the buildings in town, they're actually shaped as an E or a U, so they have center courts. You get light all around them. They didn't have big, therefore they had narrow floor plates. They became functionally obsolete as Bill built Liberty Place, and you ended up with nice square or relatively large rectangular plates. Those buildings were all converted to either apartment buildings or hotels, because that corridor kind of worked. It had the appeal of the older architecture, so it was great. Let's take a 1970s Penn Center building that's a square that has no architectural interesting characteristics. They're okay, but what's it going to be when nobody wants to rent that space? Now you're going to say, well, I can lower the rent. I believe there will be a place at some point where lowering the rent will not be good enough, where there'll simply be obsolete space. I think it's going to happen in office space. I think the 1970 suburban building on a major street, not in a park, but just sort of sitting by itself, is in trouble. We know retail strips, depending on the demographics of neighborhoods, are in trouble. There are churches in old neighborhoods that are just sitting there empty. There's going to be schools that'll be empty. There have been malls now that are empty. So on the one hand, it's sort of a negative trend. I also think, though, that what's going to emerge is a greater interest in creative reuse and adaptation of old real estate. So I think, and what's going to happen is I think this is going to be done by niche firms, not by big national players. Because for us, time is money, and so we move very quickly, and that the amount of work and effort to figure that out kind of doesn't work in our time frame. So that's sort of not a world we look at a lot. Now we'll look at a brownfield site, we'll infill, but the adaptive reuse of old real estate, but even with our own portfolio, we've been going through it and thinking about buildings, about what to do with them, because we want to kind of be ahead of this. So maybe we should invest the money now to do something with these buildings, because the next leasing cycle, they may be too hard to lease. So I think this is going to be a very big trend, and a very interesting trend. And the last one, I think, is technology, an obvious one, right, in the degree it affects everything. But there's three ways technology is affecting real estate. I think you should think about all three of them. And by the way, this is another way to play in real estate. Somebody who understands technology and understands real estate is a rare person in the business today. How does it affect real estate? Three different ways. One is it affects your own business. You're a real estate company. You need technology. So, for example, at Liberty, as I mentioned earlier, we put 130 of our buildings on a building-wide area network, so we daily get information sent to us over the internet on the electric utilization, what's happening with the air conditioning, so we can run these buildings. We also now have about 75 to 80% of all of our work orders coming over the internet. So we told our customers, you don't have to call us anymore. You can just send it in. When it comes in by address, it goes directly to the BlackBerry of our technician who's assigned to that portfolio, as well as directly to the property manager who's responsible for that portfolio and those technicians. And that property manager gets a warning an hour later if there hasn't been a response from the technician who has identified the problem and at least put in, okay, what are we going to do to solve the problem? And then we get back to the customer, and then we also, as you do when you go to car dealerships and everybody, an immediate satisfaction survey. Were we quick enough? Was it good enough? How was the response? Were we courteous? So technology affects how we run our business. Technology is going to affect the buildings themselves. Let's go back to obsolescence issues. You ever been in a building, been at the elevator lobby, and your phone doesn't work, your cell phone? That's something about the way the building's built. It might be the windows, it might be the steel structure. If you don't deal with that, that building is useless. I mean, nobody wants to be in a building where your BlackBerry doesn't work, your phone doesn't work, or whatever. When we built the Comcast Center, we spent a ton of money to make that building work. If you go into that, there's a garage that's only for the tenants. You can go down 90 feet, and your phone and your BlackBerry work. It works in every square inch of that building, because that's what it had to be a building for a big technology entertainment company. So you have to think about how these buildings are going to work. You have to think about the energy efficiency of these buildings. So LEED isn't just about green and let's put some grass on the roof. It really is my building $1 cheaper per square foot than the other guy's building because of the way I built it, materials, the way I literally positioned it on the site, the systems I put inside of it, life cycle analysis. So technology, and I'll tell you, there's a organization called Realcom. So it's the real estate sort of technology. It's where all the chief technology officers in real estate hang out. I was the first CEO to ever go there and speak. So it was a pretty nerdy group. But I said to our CIO, I said, Steve, take me around. I want to go walk the floor of the exhibit hall. I'm walking around. Major corporations are now spending money to apply technology they have into the real estate space. So we used to be ignored. This is a space, by the way, that has like no R&D. Real estate has like no R&D. But people who are into technology are thinking, oh, there's a whole sector there we've never even dealt with. So let's put meters on water systems. Let's put meters on this. Let's figure out how to do wireless systems in the building, because the buildings need to be more flexible, right? Because you now expect to be able to walk in a building and just take your laptop and go, or iPad, and go anywhere and work, just like you can at Starbucks. Well, you're going to have to be able to do that in every building, every hotel. Do you get frustrated, go to a hotel room, and you can't use the internet? What's that all about? So buildings need to be more sophisticated. And the last piece of technology is your customer. And whether your customer is an apartment dweller, a hotel user, an office user, an industrial user, they are using technology. And so how they use technology will impact whether they want your building or another building. It's permeating the industry. It's happening very fast. And candidly, I'm not sure how many people are paying attention. There are firms that are clearly paying a lot of attention. This goes back and loops back to my comment about obsolescence. And so if you're not paying attention to this real time, you're going to end up with an obsolete portfolio. Those are my thoughts. So, and with that, I'll end, and maybe I'll open it up to questions about anything. No questions. That's an interesting and a great question. And I think it's actually a very complicated question, what's going on right now. So back in '09, when the capital markets froze, and liquidity was something you suddenly had to worry about, and we came out of it, out of it in the sense that unfroze in '10. But there really were very little real estate transactions. Stuff did not really trade. Stuff didn't really start to trade until '11. And I think why it started to trade, the equity was always there. The buyers were there, but the buyers couldn't access debt. And suddenly the lenders were willing to play in a way that was at least satisfactory to the return the equity players were looking for. So prior to that, prior to '11, a life company might give you 50% LTV, and it had to be the best stuff, and it wasn't that attractive. We actually did mortgages in '09 because actually the public markets were closed to anybody. No corporation could borrow. So we actually did mortgage some of our assets. We subsequently have retired most of that. So when the debt showed up, you suddenly opened up the dam of transaction activity in '11 into '12. And so some people say, well, the cap rates are low because the debt's so cheap. I actually think the cap rates are low partially for that, but I actually think it's much more about the disconnect between supply and demand. There's so much demand for real estate, and there's so little supply coming in to buy, that's driving the cap rates, as well as the cheap debt. So you got two things going on at once. Remember, though, these lenders are only lending in a very narrow fairway. They will only lend to highly stabilized assets with good sponsors in what are historically liquid markets. So in their heads, they can say, if I had to take it back, I could sell it. There's a tremendous fall off. If you have a vacant building, the lease is up next year, it's in tertiary market, you might be able to get no debt. That still has not corrected. So another thing to pay attention to is when you look at a cap rate, what's the universe of transactions creating that cap rate? And the universe is the better assets. If you get it, so I'm not sure it's totally reflective of exactly where cap rates are for all assets. So then you say, okay, we all took macro, so huge monetary policy, we should have unbelievable inflation, right? It should just pop, and it hasn't. It hasn't now for a couple of years. There's talk that I guess in the Fed meeting, they might push out their date from 14 to 15. Because I'm actually a believer that there is somewhat of a new normal, that things have really changed a lot here for a lot of reasons, not just the downturn. I also think that something I will keep going here, but I think a lot of things are going on at once to the economy. So I actually think interest rates will stay low for a couple more years. So then you're going to say, okay, then Bill, but once that inflation happens and debt changes, don't you think that it's going to affect cap rates? And the answer is it could, it should, but if at the same time rents are moving, so in other words, inflation's happening because the Fed has pulled off the brake because the economy's better and they can, then presumably rates are moving also. At which point I think, I go back to the principle that I think real estate has people who want to own it at such scale today that I think cap rates will go up, but they will not go back to historic norms. I think they will land somewhere in between where they are today and historic norms. Because I think the demand side is different than it was 10, 15 years ago. And all we look at is NACREIF data from like 20 years ago, 30. I mean, it's not that, this time data isn't that long. And so I think you really have to be careful when you kind of conjecture where will cap rates level out. Anyone else? Yeah, in the back there, yes. I think there are two very important pieces of that question, by the way. I think it's a great question. So one is sort of, and this, you're seeing this in the REIT space. So REITs are actually just a legal structure as to how you own assets under federal tax law, right? So one of the biggest, newest REITs, $25 billion REIT, cell towers. American Tower just came out relatively recently. So people are actually looking at whether the REIT structure could also be used for other kinds of, fixed assets, infrastructure, electric companies, not, lines and poles. I mean, should that be a REIT? Warehouser, timber. So the space is seeing new creativity as to how to use the structure, and I think it's conceivable. I guess it's conceivable that you could take, toll roads and amalgamate a bunch of toll roads and take it public and call it, a highway REIT. So I guess that's possible. I actually think the more troubling issue with privatization of infrastructure is part of why it's happening is the lack of public dollars to support infrastructure. And so candidly, we're sitting here as a country under-investing in the infrastructure that for real estate that our business depends on. And whether it depends on airports to get people to hotels or highways to get people to warehouses or or mass transit to get you to a downtown office building, whatever it depends on. So at the moment, you'd have to conjecture that there will be no significant new major investment in public infrastructure. We're going to struggle to keep in place what we have. And so it goes back to, take that trend, take urbanization, all you folks want to live in cities, right? You don't want to live in the suburbs anymore, that's what they tell me. Take that trend and put on top of that trend adaptive reuse. So I think the place to be in real estate is infill, older buildings, figuring out what to do with it, because I think that's where the action is. I think expansion out of big markets, even the Dallases and the Atlantas, you're just not going to see what you used to see. People just aren't going to keep going out and ripping up cornfields. There was another, in the back, sorry, yeah. Right, right. That is a terrific question. So there is no question. We just did a massive survey of all our tenants, mainly on tenant satisfaction, property management. Sort of how we treat you. But when you ask customers what matters, I mean, everybody starts with price. Okay, so price matters no matter what business you're in. That's number one. But the second biggest issue in the real estate space is flexibility that people cite, companies, users. And flexibility can manifest itself in a variety of ways. So it can be contraction, expansion of space. It can be term. I don't know how long I'm going to be able to do what I do. I think one advantage of a REIT, and again, this goes back to our structure, is we're not trying to marry term with mortgages. So sometimes people say to me, I have one of the fun, it's a joke, it's not that, is talking to analysts, stock analysts. These are wonderful people, but they actually are not in the space, so they ask lots of questions about real estate that aren't always that well grounded. And one of them is, so Bill, rents are low, are you going to only sign short-term leases so when rents go up you can take advantage of that when the rents, I always go, no, that's a silly idea. I'm going to do what the customer wants to do. I want the business. I'm not going to tell the customer what he wants to do. Because when the rents turn, I'm going to have some other renewal turning over, and I'll enjoy those rents that day. 80 million square foot portfolio, there's enough churn that we'll always enjoy the rents of tomorrow. So we believe in trying to match flexibility. So to your question, though, we have situations with customers. So we have 150 national accounts that we've picked. Some are our customers. Some are people who want to be our customers. They are assigned to everyone is assigned to a person in the company to build a relationship, know they had a corporate real estate. And we will think about, we have done transactions where we have given you an early out in Jacksonville for you to sign a new lease with us in Houston. And you if you're one of our 150, we'll talk about that. I mean, we net have to win, but we'll help you accommodate flexibility. We have master agreements with some customers that actually allow contraction and expansion over time across multiple buildings. So we are focused on how do you make that happen. We will put an industrial tenant in a building and literally take a piece of tape, put it down, say, you can expand and contract as you want in this warehouse up to the next wall. Just let us know if you need more product. Now, on the other hand, I don't have a customer for that, so I always have the right to recapture. But they have, there's some notice period, so they could then decide, ooh, I better lease it from them and sign a real lease. So we try to do that, and it is, we think, very effective in today's world with companies. And obviously, there's tremendous pervasive uncertainty among companies today. Do we have a fiscal cliff? What are we doing with the national debt? When are we going to finish the last 3/4 of the Dodd-Frank regulations? When are we going to understand how healthcare works? When are we going to know where the defense industry is? Other than that, there aren't that many questions out there. Anyone else? Yes, please. Oh, awesome. Yep. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So, a couple questions there. So let's just talk about LEED for a second. So LEED should come under some criticism because the initial way you could get a LEED certification actually may not have guaranteed that it was an efficient building. Because it's a point system, and if you really go in and understand how the points get awarded, if you had picked a site in an urban area on top of a transit stop that had been a brownfield site, and you put in bike racks, and had a green roof, you could get a whole bunch of points and be LEED certified. And you hadn't done anything to have an energy efficient building. Currently, regulations would not allow that to happen. So there's, I guess it's LEED 2010, is a set of rules that is much more energy focused and harsh. So that past bad rap will, at least over time, go away. It now is much more robust and kind of meaningful. We also think Energy Star is a meaningful way to think about it. And I don't know if you're paying attention to this. This is another interesting phenomenon, right? So you've had now a couple cities, Philadelphia just did it, who are going to ask landlords to make public their Energy Star rating. So you can go into Best Buy and you can look at refrigerators, right? And you can figure out which one's the most efficient. You're now going to be able to go on the internet, CoStar, and figure out which office building is the most efficient. Kind of interesting, right? So we think this is a big, that's why we've been on, we just think it's coming, it's logical. Most sophisticated occupiers of space think about the total cost of consumption, not what's the rent, what's my total cost of occupancy, including square feet efficiency. So if we can get to the right person in our company and explain why this floor plate is a better floor plate than that floor plate, Glaxo, Navy Yard, they are paying rent in 600,000 square feet in downtown Philadelphia. They occupy 400,000 square feet. They're going to have the same number of employees in 205,000 square feet. Great for us. We're doing the build-to-suit. We have a long-term lease. It's an awesome building. Very proud of it. So sort of interesting what it says about the market, right? Square feet. And again, I tend to ramble on. I'm a big believer that tomorrow's worker is a very different worker than yesterday's worker, particularly knowledge workers, not just in the sense of, millennium and all that, how they work. So this is a generation that has grown up with earphones, working at Starbucks. I mean, how many of our kids sit at a desk and do their homework? They're in the bed, they're in the den, they're laying on the floor. It's all okay, but they're used to an environment that's noisier, more active, more social. So the notion of an office where I close my door is actually like, I'm not sure I really want that. I want to be with people. So open floor plate, all that's kind of what's happening. So I mean, LEED's part of this, energy efficiency is part of this, but also the efficiency of the building. Just literally how you design it. Columns. Comcast Center has no columns. There's exterior columns to hold up the outside, and I don't know if any of you ever saw it getting built. It had a concrete core. It's a particular kind of construction. It's also, by the way, much more resilient, just in case anything awful would happen. It's just a much more resilient building. So it's a concrete core, columns, the floors come off of it, attached to the outside. There's no columns on any floor. You can do whatever you want on any floor of that building. That was for us actually part of it. Like, this is going to be the most efficient, flexible, back to the flexible question, building in the market. There's no reason to build another 8'9" building in downtown Philadelphia. You're nuts if you do it. Other questions? Yes, sir. In terms of the political landscape? Okay. Well, I think Tom mentioned this earlier. We just finished 2.5 days. We have 3 times a year we have a national meeting, bringing everybody from every market and try to catch up and see what's going on. And we had an economist this morning as one of our speakers. And as she said, this is the first time in her career where she has had to worry more about policy makers and what they will do to the economy than fundamental economic, econometric data and information. And I find that very distressing. I mean, as a citizen, let alone as a business person. We have huge issues. I'm going to tell a story that I don't think you'll mind if I tell it. 2009, it might have been January or February, just before the vote on the auto bailout. Our inspector was a senator from Pennsylvania, and he set up 3 lunches and 4 business people at a time. Actually 3, so we 4-person table. And 11:30 lunch, a 12:30 lunch, and a 1:30 lunch. He obviously didn't eat, and I got invited to one of them, and a little hesitation, and the assistant at the other. It's not a fundraiser. He just wants to talk to you guys. So go. And I knew him, so we sat down, and he said, "Look, here's what I'm doing. This stuff is so complicated. I'm hearing about credit default swaps, and now I'm hearing about the auto industry. I don't know about, what do you guys think we should be doing?" I was stunningly impressed that he had the kind of, like to ask somebody. I started talking about real estate. The CEO of Janney was there, a guy with a small education company, but software education company. We started talking about our businesses. And every so often he would have to stop us because we would use a piece of jargon he didn't understand. So I'm very nervous that a group of By the way, I've worked for 5 mayors. I've dealt with governor. I mean, I have a lot of respect for elected officials, a tremendous amount of respect. Would you do it? Would you give up your personal life and your time to do that job? These are hard jobs. Most of them work really hard. Most of them are actually good people. They have, philosophical opinions about stuff, but often they're pretty well grounded. But more and more, it's a professional job. They are, they run for office a lot. I mean, they're a mayor, then they're a governor, then they become a president. And their experience level about business or economy or whatever is pretty deficient. It's like not their fault. And suddenly this has become the main thing on the plate. How does the economy work? How do I create jobs? How do I deal with interest rates? All of that. So it's a little distressing. So what I often think about is it literally is, who are they going to put in their cabinet? Who's their Council of Economic Advisors? Who are they going to turn to make decisions? I mean, we can all decide whether Polson and Bernanke and during the crisis in 8, somebody was asking what do people read? That was a question at the end of the last one. Well, what I remember is every Sunday going to Bloomberg to figure out were they bailing out AIG on Monday morning? Was it leaving Monday morning? I mean, do you remember this? It's hard to. It was like every Monday morning there was a bailout or a non-bailout of somebody, and the markets would go crazy. Those guys were in a battle, and they were making in the field decisions in a battlefield. And you can decide whether it was a good idea, a bad idea, but they had to make. Somebody made some decisions. At least they made decisions. What's nervous now is their inability to make decisions. Right? So they punted last year. They do sequestration. We all think they're going to not do the fiscal cliff. Suppose they extend it 6 months. You want to create more uncertainty? You want to have rating agencies say you don't have the guts to make a decision? So I am nervous about it. I'm nervous, by the way, both sides. Because it's probably true that Congress will be split. Regardless of who there'll be one of each, and then we'll have a president, whichever it is. Are people going to be rational enough to sit in a room and make a decision? Because I actually think the U.S. is in a terrific place. I really feel there is pent up. I talk to our customers a lot. I love doing it. It's one of the fun things of their job because we have all these different companies that do different stuff. It's kind of cool. There's tons of people that would love to make investments, do stuff, hire people. Tons of them. They're sitting on all this cash, but they're not doing it in an environment where they don't know where things are going. The energy situation with the U.S. is stunning positive. That we could have a long-term supply of energy. Stunning. So I just feel like the country's pent up. If we could just figure a way to almost get out of it. But I don't know. Let's see. I think I'm getting you got it. Thanks. Happy to be here. Good luck with your flags.